Have you ever tried switching between Formula cars and GT cars or vice versa and noticed that your performance is way off your usual pace? Well, in this video, we're going to be going over the main technique differences between these different cars and talk about why you need to drive each of them differently. Number one is going to be in your braking. In a Formula car, we typically have front and rear wings, floors with tunnels, side pods, and more, which all contribute to the car being able to produce extra downforce, let alone the physical shape of the cars themselves. Along with this, due to their small form factor and purpose-built construction, Formula cars are typically made up of materials like fiberglass and carbon fiber, meaning they will weigh significantly less than any sports car, usually in the ranges of 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. With those two factors combined, it means Formula cars will produce exceptionally high downforce to weight ratios. In extreme examples, we see modern F1 cars produce 2 or 3 to 1 downforce to weight ratios. So with this out of the way, how does this affect our braking? It's simple. The faster we go, the faster air comes into contact with the surfaces of the car, meaning the more downforce the car is going to produce. When coming down a big straight and heading into a corner, the moment before we hit the brakes is also the moment where the car is producing its peak downforce, because we're at our peak speed, and as we know, anytime we have more downforce, it means the further the tires are being forced into the ground, essentially giving us more grip. When we have more grip, we can hit the brakes significantly harder. This is why in a Formula car, the initial braking phase is so incredibly quick and hard, where we reach our peak braking pressure almost immediately into these hard braking zones. However, what happens after we hit this peak braking pressure? The car begins to decelerate, and when the car loses speed, say it with me now, the car also loses downforce and grip. So when it comes to braking in Formula cars, it means we have to begin releasing the brake shortly after hitting our peak pressure in order to deal with the consistent reduction in grip the car is going to be getting as it slows down more and more in order to not lock up the tires. To make this concept even more visible, let's overlay the speed chart on this same brake trace. Notice how the release of the brake almost follows the reduction in speed 1-to-1. This is exactly why in a Formula car your brake trace looks like this. Now with this in mind, there is a little bit of variance you have to know about. The lower level Formula car you drive means the less advanced aero parts you'll have, ultimately meaning less grip. What does this mean for your braking trace? The braking trace won't be quite as aggressive on initial input, as well as not having nearly as quick of a release, because one, you don't have such an influx of grip on the initial brake, and two, you're not losing as much grip after you hit your peak pressure because you didn't start with nearly as much downforce. Before we get into the next topic, if you guys have been enjoying this completely free content, please go down below, hit the subscribe button so it motivates me to make more of these videos. With this out of the way, let's talk about why GT braking is different. When comparing to what we just talked about, sports cars are much heavier, typically weighing in anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 pounds, while also producing less downforce as the cars are simply more bulky, meaning more drag, less downforce, along with obviously having less wings, floors, etc. Another important note here is that in most cases, the suspension can be quite a bit softer in GT cars, especially in the lower level categories where suspension may be less advanced. So what does this mean for braking? With less downforce at top speed, it means we have less immediate grip upon brake application. This means we have to be more gradual with our application of the brakes in order to not shock the weight transfer of the car, which we'll get into in a moment. In GT cars, we want our trace to appear a little more rounded on both ends of the spectrum, almost as if we're taking our time to apply and release the pedal. Because we don't have nearly as much downforce, it also means we can hold our peak pressure for longer because we're not going to be losing near as much grip as we decelerate. Next up, let's talk about weight transfer. Weight transfer plays a significant role in how Formula and GT cars handle corners, and understanding these differences is crucial for optimizing your driving in both types of vehicles. Let's break it down. As we spoke about in Formula cars, the suspension is much stiffer. This stiffer setup means the car reacts quicker to your inputs without excessive body roll or pitch. As a result, your driving can be more aggressive with your steering inputs and brake application without waiting for the car to quote-unquote settle. The combination of a lightweight construction, high downforce, and stiff suspension allows Formula cars to maintain stability even with sharp, rapid inputs. This responsiveness is why you might see drivers being more twitchy or abrupt with their steering in Formula cars, because they can get away with it due to the car's setup being more built to handle it. In contrast, GT cars typically have softer suspension setups, especially in those lower level categories like we spoke about in GT4 or touring touring cars. With this softer setup, it means the car will experience more body roll and weight shift during the braking and cornering. For drivers, this requires a more measured approach. You'll need to allow the car's weight to transfer gradually, particularly when turning into a corner. Rushing this process by being too aggressive with the steering or brakes can unsettle the car, leading to either understeer or oversteer depending on the situation. The goal in these cars is to patiently let the weight transfer laterally as you turn, enabling the tires to load up properly and generate the grip needed for optimal rotation throughout the corner. While Formula cars reward sharp and precise inputs, GT cars demand smoother and more patient driving to accommodate their softer suspension and higher mass. Mastering this distinction is essential to extracting the maximum performance from each car. In relation to weight transfer, we need to talk about steering. In Formula cars, the steering tends to be more linear. This means that the driver's input typically corresponds directly and proportionally to the car's response. Because Formula cars have stiffer suspensions and higher aerodynamic grip, there's minimum lag and delay in how the car reacts to steering inputs. As soon as the driver turns the wheel, the car begins to rotate thanks to the immediate transfer of force through the stiff chassis and tires. This linear response is a product of the reduced weight transfer during cornering. With less body roll and minimum lateral shift, the car remains planted, allowing for a smooth, precise control throughout the cornering phase. Drivers can often make minor mid-corner corrections without destabilizing the car. However, in GT cars, the steering trace is actually quite different. In these cars, it usually starts off lighter and softer and builds very progressively until we get closer to the apex, where the steering angle will ramp up rather quickly. The reason for this lies in the weight transfer dynamics. Because GT cars have softer suspension and more body roll, the car needs more time to settle into the corner. Initial inputs must be gentle to avoid upsetting the car's balance, and as the weight shifts and the tires load up, the driver can progressively increase steering lock to maximize grip. Think about it like this. You're initially just telling the car which way the corner is on initial steering input, letting the car settle until it's laterally loaded enough to apply a quicker ramp up of the wheel to get that large portion of rotation done coming into the apex of the corner. This exponential steering technique also compensates for the heavier weight of GT cars. Abrupt inputs would create excessive lateral weight transfer, potentially overwhelming the tires and leading to understeer or snap oversteer. By contrast, gradual steering inputs allow the car to stabilize, making it easier to predict and control its behavior throughout the corner. The connection between steering technique and weight transfer is crucial to understanding these differences. In Formula cars, the stiff suspension minimizes lateral weight transfer, enabling a more direct steering approach. This linearity not only makes the car feel more responsive, but also allows the driver to fully utilize the available aerodynamic grip without waiting for the car to settle. On the other hand, sports cars require the driver to manage lateral weight transfer a little more carefully. As the car's mass shifts to the outside tires, the available grip increases, allowing for more aggressive steering inputs later in the corner.